Pros and cons about living in Boise, Idaho. It seems like for every pro there is about living in Boise, Idaho, 10 other people have a con. So today I'm going to dive into the pros and cons of living in Boise, Idaho to help you decide if maybe Boise is the right place for you. I just got back into the office from a listing appointment, and the sellers haven't even been in Idaho an entire year before deciding that they need to move back. They absolutely love the lifestyle here in Idaho, but there are a couple big hangups that are forcing them to sell and move back, and I'm going to cover those in today's video. And I'm going to do this a little bit different than any of the other pros and cons videos that you've seen. I'm just going to lay out all the facts, let you decide if they're pros and cons. The first pro-con of living in Boise, Idaho is the 4 seasons. The Boise area gets all 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. I personally love living in Idaho because of the 4 distinct seasons, because there are so many things to do throughout each of the individual seasons. And most people's favorite season is probably going to be summertime for a variety of different reasons, but a lot of people who are coming to Idaho are looking forward to the actual fall season, a distinct fall season. Pumpkin lattes, not my thing, changing leaf colors, all that stuff. Idaho is absolutely gorgeous. Because Idaho is so far north, we get huge swings in daylight from summertime to wintertime. In the summer, on the longest day, we get about 15 and a half hours of sunlight, which is something that you do have to get used to. It starts getting light here at about 5:30 and stays light until about 10 o'clock at night. So if you're someone who likes to get outside, you have a ton of time to enjoy it. For myself in the summertime, if I finish a day early, 5, 6, or even 7 o'clock, you better bet I'm running home, grabbing my fishing pole in my boat or a kayak, heading out to the lake or river to enjoy 4-5 hours of sunlight. And even if you have kids, you get home from work after 5, you have time to have dinner, get cleaned up, do a little bit of homework, and then go for a walk on the green belt. Go let them burn their energy out at any of the parks. It is super awesome because you get to spend a lot of time with your family during the summer, enjoying everything that Idaho has to do outside. However, what goes up must come down, because in the winter in the Boise area, we get the inverse of that. The sun rises at about 8 o'clock, give or take, and is setting by 5 p.m. So if you're someone who works indoors, it's not uncommon for you not to get much sunlight throughout the day. Jumping back to, if you have kids in school, when I was in high school, I was in wrestling. I would go to school for practice before school, before the sun came up, go through the entire day in school, maybe be able to sneak outside at lunch to get a little bit of daylight, and then I'd be back in the wrestling room for a couple hours after school. So it was totally not uncommon for me to go days without getting any direct sunlight. This is something that you really need to take into consideration, because it can wear quite a bit on your mind, and it really gives some people the winter blues. Idaho can be pretty boring to some people. Over the years, I've heard people complain about this, and it can be true to an extent. If you're somebody who's used to living in a big metropolis with big city entertainment, you're not going to find that in the Boise, Idaho area. There aren't many professional sports teams, there's not much of nightlife unless you're in downtown Boise, and there really aren't many events in the way of fine arts or musical theater performances. However, I have a saying that I like to use for people like myself who really like to get outdoors and be active. In Idaho and in the Boise area, you're going to run out of year before you run out of things to do. Farmers markets, exploring the parks and greenbelts, kayaking, paddleboarding, floating the river, camping, fishing, hiking, movies in the park, road trips. There are so many things to do that you'll often find yourself in a predicament of not what you can do, but you're trying to decide what you can't do. For instance, just this last Sunday, I was getting a bit of cabin fever, so I wanted to go for a drive, 3-hour round trip. I drove up through the mountains to some hot springs. I got to stop along the way, see hundreds of deer and elk, get some awesome drone footage, let my dogs get out and explore some new areas, and just take in some new scenery away from town. I just want to hop in here and say, if you're finding any of this information useful, do yourself a huge favor and subscribe to the channel so you get notified on all future videos. One of the really unique things about living in the Treasure Valley is that it's more of one big city with a bunch of different suburbs rather than a bunch of individual cities. What I mean by this is that you don't have to look at one individual town that can fit each of every single one of your needs. Get a house there, have your kids go to school school there, you work there, eat, play, all that kind of stuff. You don't need to do that. The whole Treasure Valley is so interconnected that no matter which town you live in, you can utilize the amenities from each of the other towns within a totally reasonable driving or commuting distance. For instance, if you go on Interstate 84 from the far south end of town before you get to Boise, all the way to the northwest side of town outside of Caldwell, go through the whole Treasure Valley, it's only like a 30 to 45 minute commute, depending on, traffic. For instance, I currently live in Nampa. If I need dog food or chicken food or any sort of farm stuff, I go to the D&B Supply in Costco. If I'm in a mood where I want to have a really good steak or cook some really good steak or get high quality meat, I'll drive up to the Albertsons in Star, Idaho. If I want to go to Costco or do some other sort of shopping, I drive to Meridian. Even though I live in Nampa, I'm still utilizing all these other towns around me. One of my best friends lives up in the north side of Middleton, and he commutes all the way down Interstate 84 to the Gowan exit area for work every single morning. I would call him crazy, but it just goes to show that that is totally within reason. If you'd like to learn about all the top towns in the Boise, Idaho area, I just released a video on that. You can find the link in the descriptions. Even though all the towns in the Boise area are still very connected, Idaho is seriously isolated. If you're living in another area, you can drive from one big metro area to another big metro area within a reasonable commute time, but Idaho isn't the case. If you want to go to the next largest metro area, you're going to probably Salt Lake, and that's a 5.5 to 6 hour car ride. Or you're going to be driving to the west to Portland, which is like a 6.5, 7 hour car ride. Because of that, Idaho, if something isn't going on here in the Boise, Idaho area, nothing's going on. For instance, I like to go to lectures like Jordan Peterson, but because Idaho in general is pretty small, comedians, actors, all that kind of stuff, they don't necessarily always come here when they do their tours. So they'll go to big areas like Portland, Seattle, or Salt Lake, and I'm not going to drive 6 hours, 12 hours round trip just to go watch a lecture for a couple hours, which can be a downside if you're somebody who likes to go to a bunch of big cities. Now, Boise does have its very own airport. However, it's not a very big airport. It's a smaller airport. You're not going to catch cross-country flights, or you're not going to have any international flights. If you're flying out of Boise, you're going to be going to other bigger airports like SLC or SeaTac or Phoenix. I just went to Las Vegas over Christmas, and I went from Boise to Phoenix, then to Las Vegas. And this is one of the reasons that my clients who I'm just listing their house right now are going to be selling, because after a change of job, they found themselves traveling more than necessary. And if they're flying all the time, instead of just getting on the airplane at Boise and going to wherever they need to, they're catching 3 or 4 connecting flights just to get to where they need to be. That adds up quite a bit, not only for time, but to your bottom dollar as well. Idaho is in the western US, which means there's going to be wildfires. It's just kind of a part of life and living in the western United States. Some years are worse than others. Last year, we had a pretty bad fire season. Nothing close to the actual Boise area, but we get a lot of smoke blowing in from Oregon, Washington, even California and Canada. And because we're in a valley, the smoke can collect here. So if you're looking at my other videos, you're going to see in some of them, hey, the sky is pretty hazy. Some years, like I said, are worse than others. Last year was probably the worst year I've ever seen. A couple years ago, we had clear skies throughout the entire summer. So it really just varies, but that's something that you need to keep in mind if you're going to be relocating to the Boise area, is that you're going to have to be okay with the possibility of fires. Actually, just living in the western US, you're going to have that. Chances are, if you're watching this video and you're interested in moving to Idaho, you like all things outdoors, camping, hiking, fishing, anything like that. And Idaho has really great access to outdoor opportunities. I just talked to some of my clients who relocated to the Boise area a couple years ago, and that was their biggest pro about living in Idaho, is the access to outdoor recreation. They moved here from the Menifee area of California. They can get so many different places here in the Boise, Idaho area to go experience all these things where they didn't have nearly as many opportunities out there, and the opportunities that they did have were way farther away. In fact, after my trip where I left town and just went for the quick drive to go look at the mountains and the hot springs and all that stuff, I sent them some pictures of the animals that I saw, the elk, the deer, the turkeys, and they were like, hey, changing our plans. Next day, we are doing that same exact drive. I could talk for hours about camping, hunting, fishing in Idaho, but I'll save that for another day. I am just as tired of politics after the 2024 election as any of you, but in making these videos, that's something to keep in mind because Idaho is becoming one of, if not the most conservative states in the entire nation, with a lot of people over the last 5 to 6 years moving here solely because of politics and because it's such a conservative place. The state has taken strong stances on stuff like gender ideology, critical race theory, marijuana laws, abortion, and being very pro-A. If this is something that's an issue to you, and this is going to sound weird coming from a real estate agent, I would consider looking somewhere else other than Idaho because I don't see these things changing anytime soon. I've mentioned this several other times in many of my other videos, like my Idaho is weird video, which you should go check out at the end of this video. However, Idaho is super friendly and Idahoans are extremely friendly. Everywhere you go, people smile at each other, they wave. Even if you're going to a gas station, the attendant will ask you how your day is going. Neighbors wave at each other. There's just an overwhelming sense of community here and neighbors taking care of neighbors. For instance, when I went on my drive to the mountains, I stopped at a gas station and I was in there and some guy just stopped and he was asking me about my binocular harness, how I liked it because he just got one and he wanted to know my experience on it. We talked about that for 10 minutes. Totally friendly conversation, just stopping to I was getting a drink from a gas station. And that just really reinforces the experience of how friendly Idaho is. When you first think of Idaho, the first pictures that probably pop in your mind is like pine trees, pristine mountain lake, a moose, maybe an elk, of course potatoes. But Idaho in the Boise area is high desert, and I think that's something that a lot of people have this misconception about. When they're coming to Boise, Idaho, they get in the plane, they get here, and they're like, this is not what I was expecting. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, you can absolutely, within an hour, 2 hours of the Boise area, be up in pine trees and never see another person. However, that's something that you need to be sure of, that you know when you get off the plane here. Idaho is high desert. If we didn't have these two big rivers in the area, it would look a lot different than it does right now. What are the biggest cons for you? Did you come out with more cons in this video or more pros? YouTube really thinks you're going to like this video right here, so give it a watch. Until next time, I'm Isaac Crace with Top Idaho Real Estate.